This is a webinar on using tech to mitigate weather risks in constructions. I'll be kind of moderating this. My name is Bryce. I am the CEO and co-founder of Pavewise. We are a technology company that helps with the horizontal industry, automating data, one of them being weather. So I'll just be the one kind of controlling things here, asking questions and kind of hitting on the main topics of what it is and how we can use technology to really mitigate the impacts of weather. We work in an external environment a lot of times with construction, and it impacts our schedules, our safety, our compliance, our specifications, and how can we use technology to really mitigate that risk. So first off, I just want to introduce our two individuals who'll be discussing this, Mr. Dom Delfino and then Josh from EHAB. Dom works at Pavewise and is a director of growth, but I'll let you introduce yourself briefly, and then Josh, if you want to do the same.
Thanks, Bryce. Yeah, Dominic Delfino here, Director of Growth at Pavewise. Before joining the Pavewise team, worked in construction technology for about 7 years at one company. But before that, I was a project engineer at Kiewit and at Walsh. So a lot of external environmental experiences in my time, especially working around, bodies of water that go directly into the water source at in the city of San Francisco. So very stringent requirements, and weather plays a big part in that because you're in the watershed. So yeah, a lot of experience with weather and how that impacts our project, but also how it impacts our relationships too, with all stakeholders.
Yeah, thanks, Bryce. Thanks, Dom. Really good to be here, folks. So I'm Josh Graham. I'm the founder of EHAB. Yeah, Pavewise and EHAB have been aligned for a little while now, obviously on this big old problem of weather risk. So I'm from the UK. I've just moved to North America because we have been working in the UK for about 5 years now. And yeah, really recognizing that the problem is global. It's not just in the UK where we have bad weather, although it is not very nice weather over there. So looking forward to the discussion today, and thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you both for taking the time in this and your experience and expertise and just your real world view on this will be very, very nice to have and talk about. We're going to look at this from two different ways. There's ways to mitigate risk in a forecasting, scheduling aspect of using historicals and really what is my risk in the bidding and scheduling, and then a second piece of this actually happened. How do I collect accurate data to prove conditions and compliance and look at that risk in a short-term kind of methodology? So we'll just jump into some main discussions. The first question, I'll ask you both, but I'll start with Dom, is what do you think the biggest weather-related risk in construction is, and how do they impact projects from your experience? What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, there's a reason why I'm on this call, right? Like I mentioned, I experienced a lot here, but when talking to the team at Pavewise and learning about Pavewise, it really started to, make me think about my experience, but also the experience I had with clients, working at a construction tech company. Like how do you connect like construction technology and weather? And, it made me start to, realize my own experiences were kind of not great and not efficient, right? So I just think back to the times when I was a young project engineer out of college, and you probably get put on the safety and the quality and the environmental track when you first get out there, right? No one wants to do it. It's one of those things that sometimes even if you're, not at a big company like Hewitt, it falls on, the project manager sometimes. So the risk is, in my opinion, and being at Pavewise and what we do, it's not being compliant. Like that's one of the bigger risks I've seen just in my own experience, but also being here at Pavewise talking to our contractors. When you ask them, our first question always is, what does weather mean to you when we're talking to contractors? And it takes them a little bit of time to just sit there and be like, it actually means a lot. And, one person said it means everything. And that is, that was actually a vertical construction contractor who said that, which I found surprising because, I always think you're enclosed, you don't have to worry too much about the weather, but you start to think about, well, how do you get access to the job site? These aren't very permanent structures that you're working around, to start with. You have temporary structures that can be impacted by the weather too. And then access, and then also cranes, right? Like cranes are hugely impacted by what we call wind, which is also something that, you really don't think about because you can't see it, but you can feel it. So when it comes to that, piece of compliance, though, you start to think about, well, how are we documenting this? How are we keeping track of this? So that poses a huge risk on the project, because you have to report on that, but then you also have the person you have to report it to, and what's their source of truth. So now we start to look at, well, what is the source of truth? And I think source of truth is always something that comes up in construction technology, right? You think about document source of truth, documents, photos, where we, where's all the photos live, but no one ever talks about weather. And that, when we look at contracts and we look at timelines on contracts, I know Josh will probably talk about this, but it does start to impact that. So, how do we think about, well, how are we adding weather days? How are we documenting those weather days? What is our source of truth to show that those weather days existed? That's a huge issue right now, and that's what we prioritize at Pavewise, is having that single source of truth, being able to give people, notifications when they do hit a weather day, or give them, the forecasted, 3-week look ahead on what the weather is supposed to be like, so you can start to prepare. So, yeah, there's a lot in that, but
Yeah.
just wanted to kind of,
So
digest it there, hopefully.
yeah, so just taking a little bit out of that, pulling, extracting out, obviously collecting highly accurate data and documenting it is very important. It's a mundane task. Um, we all have to do it, like you said. We're actually required to do it in the States if you have EPA compliance with stormwater. But y yeah, it's one of those things that sometimes might get forgot about, or you're busy doing 10 other different things. So the automation of it, and I agree with you totally. It's kind of just we've always dealt with it, right? Weather is just one of those things that's like we can't control it. We just deal with it. But it's getting to the point where it's getting more extreme and things like that. So I totally agree with you. Josh, I'd love to have your opinion on, what are the biggest weather-related risks in construction that you guys concentrate on, and how do they impact projects, and get your point of view on that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think it's really, obviously, this is why we're doing the webinar, because the synergy is so good. There's the forward looking and the backward looking, right? Which are just both clearly very important if you want to manage that risk. Um, I think the biggest, I guess, weather risk is actually just building on your point a little bit, Bryce, to what you just said, which is that it touches so many different parts of the operation that it's no one's job. A little bit to the point that you just made earlier, Don, which is that it gets dumped on someone and dumped on someone, and then because of that lack of perhaps there's no weather risk specialist in the company, it then means that it's like completely diluted across everyone's roles. And it means then that balls just are getting dropped, right? Like if you're bidding and tendering, obviously we really focus on looking forward. Often people will just say, well, okay, last year we had this many weather days. Let's just chuck that in. Or, I've done work in this area before. So, of course, what happened in the past is an exact predictor of the future. So I'll just put in, and they can be quite, because there's time pressure when you're bidding. You obviously want to get these things out the door, and you're making commercial, you're kind of hedging. You're thinking, well, are we going to get away with this many weather days? And it all gets wrapped up into this, and it ultimately means that it's a bit of a dark art. But I think because there is not a specific person thinking about it, they're just thinking about it as in a collection of risks. It can often be missed, which is the same when, as you were just talking about from a compliance perspective, you might not be as focused. You might just tick the box, but you might not go further than that. And actually, I think what you're trying to say, Bryce, is that we really need to be going further than the tick box exercise, because it saves you time and money, right? So I think, to kind of close my point, it's this ubiquitous impact of weather is the problem. The problem is that there's so many places it touches, And we don't really have a system today that kind of helps tackle everything in all these places. There's bit parts solutions, and kind of some people, I've met a lot of people in scheduling departments. You'll have 100 schedulers, and there will be one person who has gone completely gung ho on it, right? They've like built their own spreadsheet. They've done everything possible to try to tackle this problem because they've got really nerdy about it. And actually, what they've done is usually pretty good, but it's not being shared across the business. It's in a spreadsheet. It's not live. It's not updated. And that's a forward-looking, trying to model something forward-looking, right? So it's, trying to create it so that it is business as usual.
Yeah, definitely. And the forward part of it is very important in the bidding process, in understanding your impacts, and that process has always been kind of a shooting from the hip, using past experiences, and really with the amount of data that we have in the future of what we have for technologies, it really we don't have to do that anymore. We have data-driven decisions and stuff. So, and it hits on every part of the construction from do I have temperatures to place concrete to can I run it's not just rain, it's everything that it can touch and affect from. So definitely agree with you there. Um, so let's move into another question. Dom, how do you think the technology and data can help contractors better manage these weather risks? You've hit on a little this already, but just, you know, what is it that you really think this technology is solving to help contractors? What is it solving?
Yeah, a big one is automation, right? Technology should be something that makes things easier and not make it more of a pain or a chore. And like right now, like Josh mentioned, it's spread across everyone, so no one really thinks about it. And well, okay, if that's the case, well, let's just automate it, right? Like that's the part I think technology is playing a big role and where we're seeing a big impact for our contractors is, yeah, maybe I didn't get out to the job site that day as a project manager and my foreman saying XYZ on what happened. And again, I have the owner who's saying, well, no, like based off what I'm reading from, the weather station that's, 30 miles away sometimes, this is what, it shows. But right now, what we're doing is automating that process for everyone, right? It's the one transparent spot. You think about, when we're thinking about these disputes and everyone, you start to get like I remember taking screenshots of a website just to be like, hey, this is what, it said it was. And that was sometimes half my day, at the end of the month because I had to show and we had to report all this stuff at the end of the month. So if I can just get this automated, set up one little filter like we do in Pavewise to send a report to give you, hey, this is when you experience, these are the days that had high wind experience or whatever it is. And that's one thing too, is like you can set your thresholds. That's part of, I think, maybe what Bryce, you were talking about a little earlier with, DOTs and the spec and whatnot. Like every project's a little bit different on what those requirements are. And it depends what type of job you're doing. If you're doing a vertical job, probably wind and temperature are going to be pretty important because concrete curing using the crane. But if you're on a vertical job, it's like, well, yeah, precipitation is a huge one because we can't work in a muddy mess and we can't, lay anything down. So that it really changes, but being able to automate this and set your standards, and then have that all just data flow into you, or even just receive a simple text notification to say like, hey, you experienced a weather day. Like those are the things I think technology can help with this, not a problem. I don't think weather's that much of a problem until it becomes something, right? And that's when it is a problem. So we're getting ahead of that, and that's what technology can do with our contractors when it comes to like that compliance piece.
Yeah, so automation. So when that daily journal or that impact somebody thinks somebody else is maybe taking care of it. Um, you just are safeguarded knowing that there's a technology doing it for you, kind of being your assistant, right? Yeah. So automation's taking a huge part of construction right now with AI to all the technologies. And I know, Josh, you guys really have a specifically built predictive model that helps contractors plan for potential disruptions before they happen. Um, could you explain more on how that helps contractors manage these weather risks and what that really is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all know benefits that can come from technology, right? But the important thing is like, how do you actually make that transformation scale across your business? And I think that's what we've really tried to do, is make sure that the software that we're building isn't just something that's like, oh yeah, let's do a pilot, and then it's kind of like, okay, that was great, but how do we actually mean that 100 projects, 200 projects across our portfolio can really easily tap into it? And actually, it's something that you said, Dom, that I think is so important, which is what are the thresholds that we are being impacted by? Because if we create this, so what happens in EHAB is the first thing we do is we run a risk workshop with people, which is to say, what are the activities that you undertake, and what are the thresholds at which, how cold could it be to pour concrete, or what are the wind speeds at which your cranes are being stopped, right? What is our shared understanding of that? And once you have that rule set, we then do a deep schedule analysis on, it can be a tender schedule, it can be a schedule in progress. It doesn't matter. We are analyzing hundreds of schedules a day at this point, and we're then identifying, okay, well, this scheduled activity is associated with wind speed risk, or this scheduled activity is associated with flood risk, or whatever it might be. And then the model that we've built is a global model. It leverages satellite data. It leverages weather stations. I'm sure at some point it will be able to leverage the data coming from Pavewise stations as well, right? That would be a phenomenal add-on to make that data even more robust. And we did do a forward-looking simulation of, okay, if you were doing these activities based on the conditions, based on any weather pattern changes that are occurring, what is the likelihood of downtime? What is the likelihood of impact? And as we're running that simulation, we also run what if scenarios. So the idea being that we can identify potential optimizations in the schedule related to weather, so that even before you get to the point of needing to make a claim, you can identify, look, 3, 6 months, 12 months down the line, there's this key week where we're doing, I don't know, a lift or a pour. The consequence of that not going ahead is going to have some knock-on effect on the end date of the project. Okay, maybe we need to accelerate so that we avoid doing that pour in November, where the chance of success is worse. Or maybe we have to get 3 or 4 extra gangs, because you know what, it's worth spending the money now so that we avoid the potential of some downstream cost. And I think those types of decisions have always been being made, but they've been being made in the dark, right? Because we worked with a client recently where they described exactly, we were doing this scenario, we were running a what if scenario, and what ended up happening was that actually by doing the acceleration, it knocked something into the winter in 2 years' time, and it actually had a greater impact on the end date than if they had done nothing. And they were like, oh God, is this what has been potentially happening before, where we've actually increased our risk by spending more money? So it's one of those things where it's much cheaper to run a simulation, click a button, see what happens. You still obviously have to decide whether you're going to take the decision or not. But I think that's the power of data and forward-looking analysis. It allows you to say, we're just providing the platform and the software. We're not the experts. We're just trying to empower the construction experts to take better decisions. So I think, yeah, to me, Bryce, that's what that forward-looking capability is all about.
Yeah, we get back to the data-driven decisions, right? Using data to really look at what the impact could be. And, I talk about the elephant in the room, but there's 30 to 50 billion annually due to weather disruptions in the construction industry. It's a massive disruption that it's always been that way. People kind of have that ingrained in their heads that well, we just deal with it when it comes, not actually realizing what some of the costs of these disruptions are doing, like you described. And we see this a lot. We've actually had a lot of owners and DOTs, and maybe Josh, you've seen this too, where the states, the people paying for the project, don't want to get into litigation, and they want a tool to actually use to identify these risks together and be work through these, because disputes, claims, all these things, they cost a lot of time and money on these projects. And it's been stated that 30% of projects end up in some kind of litigation, and most of the time that's around completion dates and liquidated damages and things like that. So these tools can help identify that, and I love how you guys are doing it in a predictive forecasting because that's where it's at, right? If you can identify the risk and mitigate it through data, that's just more money in the pocket. That's more success. That's less headaches, and that's really the future of what these technologies can do. So thanks for sharing that. We'll just jump into let's talk about some real world examples because we're talking about what these can do, but like, you know, we'll prove it, right? Like, where has this actually happened? So Dom, if you could share a real world example of a solution that helped the project stay on track despite, weather or how it helped them prove impacts, um, share that please, because that's where the real value is how is this being used by customers and what's it doing?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to build on Josh's and your point there with like DOTs and owners and even setting up how estimators think about this. It's like you do we've heard this, Bryce, right? Like it's like, hey, this is how we've always done it. And it's like, oh yeah, how do you look at weather impacts and risk when you're bidding a job? And it's like, oh, we just fluff in X amount of days. And you're like, wow, that's a lot of days for a huge project. And you start to think about, back to, we're going back to like owners. It's like, yeah, they're accepting the lowest bid. But do we realize how much in there is like related to weather risk? That could, on large projects, it could be millions of dollars just fluffed for those weather risks. Now, again, everyone's doing it. So if you do have better weather predictive insights, like, yeah, now you're going to start to trim the bid a little bit there because you know exactly what the impacts might be, and you can factor in a smarter decision rather than say like, oh, we just always do 20 days, and that's just the standard where we are. But has anyone ever looked at that? This again goes back to data, right? Like technology, like how smart are we getting about this? And this is where documenting this, being able to see it is important. Now, when it comes to like what we're doing with just the day to day, the actual documentation of it. I mean, we see it a lot. We see it first, like I think Bryce, you and I, we were talking to a team down in Florida, where they did they did have this huge weather event, and it got into act of God territory. And that's where you actually can start to trigger some insurance policies in certain situations. And so being able to show the accurate on-site weather, not what was at a weather station 30, 20 miles away, but what happened exactly on their job site with our hyper local weather station. They were able to start having a better conversation about, well, yeah, we do need to start kicking in some, whether it's the insurance policy or act of God clause in the contract with the owner. So it just puts you in a better position, is what we've seen, having that accurate on-site representation of the weather, and being able to show that you just didn't do what I used to do and take screenshots of the weather websites, right? Like you do have this showing that you are proactive in this and being on the same page with the owner. It starts to make those relationships a lot better. So yeah, that I just wanted to touch on that before I started talking about some of the other things because it's so until you start to think about it and start to really look at it, it's back of mind always. And that's the unfortunate thing about weather, how much it's costing this industry, like you mentioned, Bryce. It's a lot of money. And if I can shave some of that because I'm being smarter about how I look at weather, I can probably win more jobs and be more effective in just how we work with owners and how we plan our work. Well, one case about planning work, though, just because I will throw that out there. We had a company called Knife River, local to us in the upper Midwest. You know, they used our hyper local weather station. It was a 42-mile job, 90-minute round trip end to end. Like a lot of us who work in the horizontal space, this is just we see these types of projects all the time, right? On the east side of the project, there was rain. It was heavy enough to shut them down a whole total inch within an hour. But the weather station on the west side of the project, all the way on the other side, showed no rain. So they were able to just move their trucks, keep their crew optimized. They didn't have to send everyone home because, typically you're like, oh, this, the job is rained out for the day. So you have to pay everyone, their half day. But no, they didn't have to do that. They actually moved everyone and all the trucks. So you're thinking, five to $6,000 per hour for this crew and this entire team, moving that over, keeping them productive, getting them to the right spot, and then avoiding the shutdown. And then also, being productive on the work, not having to, take that, maybe it was a day, maybe it wasn't a day of weather, and make it, make it actually work for them. So that's what we saw with Knife River. Pretty awesome story, just, with the horizontal way and the way we work. Like even we see differences 10 miles away, right? Like we have contractors setting up multiple stations within a 10-mile radius because it just differs so much. Everyone likes to call them microclimates. Coming from San Francisco, that's what we'd call them. Like you go a mile away and it'd be completely different. 10 degrees cooler, maybe you get fog. On the other side, it's sunny and it's, 80 degrees. But you're starting to see that just all across the country, not just in, a hilly area. So it's pretty interesting how we can, optimize this technology to just, use this to schedule these crews and make better decisions in a day span, right? So yeah, pretty awesome.
Yeah, microclimates are a real thing, and it's amazing how we as we start getting and collecting more data, it happens, except especially with this extreme weather. I know the project you're talking about down in Florida had a National Weather Service station 6 miles off the project that recorded a completely different amount of rain. This project just happened to have it was a hurricane that went through the center of the hurricane went through it, and they got tremendous amounts of rain. Uh, so within, I think it was 7, 8 miles, there was a difference of twice as much rain. And they were able to prove that, right? That no, this is on our site. This is what impacted us. This is why we had washouts in our bridges and roads and there was some crashes, some, 80, 90 mile per hour winds because it happens, right? This extreme weather is real. Josh, if you could give us a real example, I know you have a lot of them working with customers, and you've kind of already touched on one, but just a real world example of where that light bulb clicked on and your customer was like, "Yep, boom, this is real."
Yeah, absolutely, guys. And wow, yeah, twice as much rainfall. That is scary stuff. I think I'll share a contractor and a client example. So on the contractor side, obviously contractors want information that's going to help them justify to their client why their schedule is robust, and also that there is the right amount of time risk allowance in there. So Dom, I think you said 20 days, was it? You gotta just chuck in 20 days. That's our standard approach, right? Of course, on some projects that might well be the case, might well be 20. But we very, very often have it in the UK on big projects where it's much, much more than 20, given the types of exposure, big linear jobs like you're talking about, Dom, right? Or energy projects, coastal projects. But it's hard to justify that. It's hard to kind of get out of that mindset of, well, we always just put 20. And so, but if you can leverage EHAB's model and have a meaningful discussion with the client to say, look, guys, it's actually 60. This is where these days are most likely to come. And this is the reason why we have this amount of risk pot money set aside so that we can mitigate this. And it explains it in detail. And there's a mathematical formula behind it. It becomes very difficult for the client to then say, well, I think you're wrong, because, okay, we can argue about how much money we want to spend and how much confidence we want to have in the numbers, but we can't argue with the numbers. And it just means that instead of it being a conversation about, well, arguing over the weather, it becomes actually a more meaningful risk discussion about, well, how much do we want to spend? How much confidence do we want to have? And I think that just puts everyone on a better footing, because even if you decide that we're going to take that riskier approach, well, you're aware of that fact. You're aware of why you're taking that decision, because you want to try to, if there is going to be an upside to the weather, you want to have it, but it means you'll also suffer the downside if it goes wrong. So I think and that, I mean, we've got about 6 or 7 very big contractor clients in the UK, and most of them use us on every single one of their bids. So, hundreds of examples, I think there's almost 250 examples now of bids being accepted where an EHAB analysis has justified in a number of days, and that day's budget being accepted by the client, which for a general contractor is money in the bank, right? If we're enabling you to get an extra 5 days, an extra 10 days, whatever it is, that means you're getting paid for money which you should be and is at risk for you. Now, why would a client want to use this, you ask? So, of course, clients equally are going to have a financial implication if their project is delivered late. So if, like in the water industry in the UK, there are fines if you don't deliver certain types of infrastructure by certain dates. I'm sure it's the same in Canada and the US as well. Or if you're a private developer, of course, every day that your asset isn't making money, you're losing revenue. So being able to understand actually if the date of completion is realistic or not is going to be entirely tied in with your ability to pay back on loans or whether you're going to have to pay a fine or not. And so, of course, if it ends up that the schedule isn't realistic and we need to make a decision about it, this is again where we come back to that example of the acceleration, right, Bryce, who I was mentioning earlier. So actually, I'll cite an example where they decided not to accelerate because the probability of them completing just they weren't confident. And then it turned out to be the wettest winter on record. And it was about a £20 million acceleration that they were going to do. And so it was entirely justified that if they had spent that 20 million, they would not have accelerated the project to the key date that they were looking to do. So there's lots of examples like that where the client still gets a massive benefit, even though they may be paying slightly more for the amount of risk that's being put in the pot.
Yes, then that makes total sense. I mean, liquidated damages are real. They are very common here in the States when you have a completion date, you don't hit it, and if you can't back that up with data, that's actually going to the States. We're working with multiple DOT agencies as well because they don't want to fine the contractor. They actually want to build a good product on time and accessible to the public or traveling, community if it's a road. So they want to work with the contractor on here's the data, here's the real what happened, and it's just like the centralized platform. Um, and that also brings up too, like competitive bid. That's real. I mean, shooting from the hip and putting just fluff in. That's the difference between getting that job and not getting the job, or um, having the wettest winter you've ever had, and all of a sudden you're paying thousands and thousands of dollars in liquidated damages. And I've seen it personally. I've ran projects personally that we've paid damages because the weather came in, played an impact. We didn't have the data to take it back to the state and be like, here's the days I actually did not have the temperatures to do paving. And that's kind of what I've been one of the biggest complaints we hear from the owner side is the contractors or the person contracted to do the work never brings us the good, reliable data or data that we can really follow efficiently. It's always just like little pieces of this and that, snapshots from like Dom was saying from a weather app. And it's like when you have that infrastructure of data, it's a lot easier to communicate about impacts and things like that to really work together. So great example, real world example, guys, and it's happening. It's out there. This is eventually something I think the industry, just sees the impacts of it, and as people are actually seeing it in real life and seeing the benefits of it, that's amazing. So thank you for those examples. We'll just jump into another question here. If you had to say like the best practices contractors can implement right now to minimize weather risk, just say they're not going all in on technology or anything, just from your experiences, what maybe are the simplest things they can do with the technologies they have now, or just best practices, just to kind of give an idea.
Oh, I was gonna say use Pavewise, because that it's always the right solution. But no, I think I touched on it earlier, right? Like automate the process. Like find a tool, like everyone's using a weather app or something of that nature. Start automating that on your end, whether that's, using a quick reminder in your calendar to take a screenshot of what that weather is that day. Like just have that down so you don't, and be proactive about it, because I think that's what we're seeing a lot of people look at, Pavewise, they don't have to use it, or Ground Truth, they don't have to use it for 3 months sometimes because weather conditions are so good. But that one day that you do have to use it, or you do have to, go look at the weather, and you don't do it because you're not used to it. You're not automating that process. I think automation, so then you don't have to think about it ever. That's a big one. And then the documentation piece, that automation of documentation, like knowing, being proactive in that sense, so that, your owner and you have that good relationship on what the weather is, or what is the impacts of that. Like once we start being proactive, we're starting to just build a different conversation with our owner and get ahead of, anything with LDs or anything like that. So I think that's important for a lot of people. And then the last part I have on this too is, know your contract requirements or your spec requirements in your state or with your owner. I think that's a big one we noticed. To the extent, like we actually built what we call spec chat. It's a feature in our app that actually lets you talk to your spec book to start to search, well, what is a weather day, or what are the requirements when we do have a forecasted rain day, like from a SWIP perspective. We actually built that because so many people were not aware, like they were being proactive about the weather, but then they're like, okay, now what do we do with this? Or what are those requirements, those impacts? So we ended up building that tool. So I think knowing your contract or knowing your spec book is super important when it comes to how does weather impact, what we're doing on a job site.
Yeah, no, and you bring up the compliance piece of it too. Compliance, compliance, compliance. We are literally, we're contracted we have a book that tells us the temperatures that we can do the work, the rainfall, erosion control for stormwater management. We have all these variables that tell us when we can and can't do things, and it's all really dictated by weather. So understanding and documenting, I didn't have conditions to do this today. You can't control that, but being able to do that efficiently is very good. Being proactive, I like that. Proactive. So, Josh, anything you want to put into that from your experience and what you've seen, and any tips on that?
It's so difficult to think of a simple way, right, of improving on weather risk, because there's so many parts to it. Um, I think it may not be relevant directly to weather, but if so, from a scheduling perspective, something that is really setting up a lot of contractors for success that we see is putting activity codes into their program so that you know what type of activity. Of course, you can write, concrete, this, that, whatever in the text, but if you actually codify it into your schedule as this is a concrete activity, this is a lifting activity, that small piece of work, it immediately makes your schedule able for EHAB to be able to analyze it in like 30 seconds. But I know it's also a lot of what other tools that are doing schedule risk analysis or schedule optimization all utilize as well. So if what you're thinking about is what's a simple way that I can make my business much more oriented towards leveraging technology, weather obviously analysis being one that you can get from EHAB, but regardless of whether you're using EHAB or not, if you put activity codes in your schedule, that is going to save you so much time integrating with these solutions. And some really smart contractors are using those codes to bake in like cost analysis and various other analysis into their Power BI dashboards as well. So I know I dodged the question, Bryce. It's not necessarily weather related, But I really think if people can do that, it's a low lift. It has this whole sweet spectrum of benefits. And of course, if they're using EHAB, it has that benefit as well. So yeah, I think that for me, that's the low hanging fruit.
Yeah, no, that sounds like kind of a good foundational stepping stone to getting towards that, dipping your toes into setting up your structure correctly to know um, you will be maybe someday integrating that in and just getting your data in the right position. Because that's, everything's data driven, right? Good data is important, but making sure the systems can talk and evaluate that data in the most efficient manner possible, right? So all great tips. There's a lot there's a lot of moving parts in weather. I liked when you said that. It's the whole process, the life cycle of construction, right? Every piece of it involves weather or compliance. And I think that's the important part of taking that concept and understanding that from start to finish is very important. And that's why we like working together. You guys are the brains of the forecasting, the schedule identification, and we're the tool that's there when it does happen. You can prove it and give you those triggers and identify your compliance requirements of those types of things for your more of your field crews and stuff. So it's a unique position that we're both in, and we're both striving to really change this industry's mindset towards that and keep pushing the limits forward. We're we got about 5-10 minutes left here. Um, we'll just hit on some main things, some recaps, some key takeaways we talked about throughout this process, and then maybe Dom and Josh, you both just kind of, if you want to be reached out to, how to do that, those types of things. But some of the key takeaways is we know weather risks are unavoidable. We work in construction. There's some part of our process that has to be done in an external environment that we can't control. So using data-driven technology can help contractors play smarter and reduce delays, that mitigation. We know that. Um, helping helping the industry adopt that and prove it is going to be the next big step. Josh, can you maybe talk about how you're helping the industry adopt this methodology? I know actually putting the pieces out there and testing it in real world applications, but you're doing this with us here. What is your kind of overall feel like? Is the industry kind of seeing talking to the elephant in the room and seeing the light, or what's your feel on this?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Bryce. I think, um, as you said, there's a real push now for more technology being embedded, but that is a challenge. Technology transformation is not easy, and so I think why you guys have had so much success and why some of the success we've had has been from our simplest products, right? When actually all you have to say is, look, let's stick a weather station on site and we can start getting better data. Loads of things flow from that, but actually the action to get started is a simple one. And that's what, we tested lots of different ways of doing things and, this and that. And we just found that, look, if you start with the risk workshop, if you start by just facilitating a better discussion about, okay, what are the weather risks that you're facing and getting everyone on the same page, even if all they do is have that meeting, we've helped them create a spreadsheet which says, these are our weather risks, these are the thresholds. You know what? We're happy. We've moved you further along the journey of maturity in terms of being able to assess weather in a better way. And just like I was saying about those activity codes, it's taking you one step further on the journey of maturity into being able to plug in better data analysis into the way that you do your operations. Obviously, fantastic for us if they then decide, okay, let's leverage EHAB. Let's start working on this. But I guess the key takeaway that we've learned is start simple, right? We had so many pilot projects where they were like, okay, we've got these 4 or 5 use cases. We want to test this with this person and this with this person. But the more moving parts you have, guys, as you know, it just becomes difficult, right? So I think start simple, and then you can grow from there, right? Once it starts to prove it, okay, now you have 5 projects who have the station, and then they start wanting to, okay, what other features have you got, guys? So I think, yeah, that's the takeaway for me is start simple.
Yeah, and I think that's very important in our industry. There's a lot of things going on, right? So lowest hanging fruit, start simple. And I really like you said this earlier too, but you have to know, start tracking how much is this impacting. You can't, what is that saying? You can't measure what you don't track, I believe it's a saying. So like start tracking it, start looking at it and seeing how much is this costing me as a company. Because you'll be really surprised. And I think that might be part of what you do with your workshop is like identifying some of that because it's pretty amazing. We've never sat down with a contractor that is ever been like, oh, I thought I spent more than that. It's always been the other way. Like, holy man, I spent $500,000 on liquidated damages across my entire company last year. Why? So once you start evaluating that data and looking into it further, you're going to open up a can of worms, but that's the first step too. And keeping it simple. Dom, anything you want to put into that?
I mean, I was nodding aggressively yes when you said keep it simple, Josh. Like, I think that's what we're trying to do is just, hey, make you think about it, but then also just, again, I go back to automation, right? Set it up, and then you don't have to worry about it anymore. So as simple as possible is the easiest way to go about this and impact change and enact change in a company. Because, I mean, again, I mean, I'll be honest, like a lot of people are like, oh, another technology. And it's like, yes, it's another technology for something that you A, probably don't think about often until it becomes a problem. But B, like, yeah, we're not trying to be another technology that's just gonna take up a lot of your time and maybe not have the return on investment that people are used to. Because I think we've seen enough technologies in the last 10 years where it's like, I'm done. I'm tired of this. Too many point solutions. But again, this is a point solution that I don't think anyone's really challenging it, right? Like, or challenging this issue. Like, I think EHAB and Ground Truth by Pavewise is probably the only ones I've seen. And that's why I'm excited about like when we talk to contractors and you start to have these conversations, they're like, yeah, no, you're right. Like we're just kind of just used to, taking the LDs and like putting that in the project cost, and we actually don't look at it from a global level. But once you start to just ask simple questions and show them simple processes to really attack this problem, yeah, then it's not a point solution, it's a problem solver, right? So that's what I think, when it comes to just the takeaways, it's yeah, simplified processes that, just become automated at some point.
Yes, keep it simple, right? Keep it simple, automate, and take the steps into identifying what is this actually costing me. Because if you take those steps, you're going to start to see things that maybe you don't want to see, but are very important in the success of your projects, your who you are as a company, those types of things. These are massive, and I truly believe the companies who will be the most successful with bidding, with completion, are going to start adopting more and more of these technologies because they see the value in it. And that's exciting. That's exciting for both of our companies. It's exciting for the industry because ultimately what we're doing is improving the process, right? I mean, it's the end goal. I know it's your end goal too, Josh, with EHAB is how do we make this process more efficient, better, create better infrastructure, help the contractors and the clients just work better, use data-driven decisions. So with that, I mean, we'll kind of just last piece of this is some closing remarks with if there's maybe one thing that you want to talk to the customer or just talk about the technology, the risk, anything like that, just go ahead and talk about it. Maybe just where they can reach out to you, anything like that, so we can make those connections to the interested individual. So Josh, go ahead if any high level thoughts of anything and just kind of a closing remarks, I'd happily take them from you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're all looking for consistency in our businesses. Doesn't matter what business you're in, right? Consistency is what creates a great business. And for sure, in construction, there are always risks coming at you from left and right. And as we've identified, weather is one of those ones which is it's always been there. Uh, but there are changes afoot, which are meaning that we need to take it more seriously. So I think to create that consistency that you want for your business to be able to achieve the revenue targets that you want to achieve is about systems and putting systems in place, systems that allow you to forecast better, systems that allow you to track better. Ultimately, and that's where EHAB comes in, is trying to be a system for bidding and scheduling. That means your schedule is in the best format that it can be, so that you're making the best decisions on an ongoing basis for the consistent results that you need to deliver. So very happy to talk to anyone about this. You can reach me at josh.graham@ehab.co, or just check out the website, which is ehab.co. Yeah, you can fill out a form on there if you want to reach us. We are doing more and more projects in North America, so yeah, very happy to kind of talk about some of the specifics.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're a huge advocate for this. I mean, I think you're the probably the biggest pushing this in construction, and your passion in it and everything is shows shines through. So we appreciate that, and you know, reach out and talk with Josh and ask questions. Dominic, anything high level takeaways, anything that you'd like to discuss, talk to anybody about?
I think just we want we want people to be more proactive when it comes to weather risks, right? Like we want people to question themselves, understand themselves. So that's what we're doing in our initial conversations with people. We're not just throwing a solution at people. We want to understand first, and then we can see like, hey, is this the right tool for you? Because there might be other things. It could be just a simple process without Pavewise or Ground Truth, but again, we don't know that until we start going and starting to ask the questions. And so I think that's what we want to do when we talk to people. We've shared a lot of information on, how to be better about weather-related risks in this webinar. So if you didn't get everything here, or you just want to question more about what you're doing and the potential that EHAB or Pavewise can help you, yeah, reach out, please. Like that's what we want. And that's the reason why we did this webinar. So yeah, dom.delfino@pavewisepro.com. Shoot us an email. Also, again, like Josh said, you can visit our website or just reach out on LinkedIn too. We're always checking that and chatting with people on LinkedIn to just talk more about these weather-related risks.
Yeah, thank you, Dom. Yeah, so I that'll conclude our webinar using tech to mitigate weather risks in construction. Some very unique perspectives from the front end of forecasting and scheduling, identification, those types of things with EHAB, and the back end of weather collection on site with highly accurate data and compliance, and a unique twist on both ends, very important. Um, Please reach out to Dom or Josh. Any questions you want to start dipping your feet into the weather tech world of how do I build better projects? How do I mitigate risk? These two individuals are the experts in this. So reach out. Both friendly individuals, passion for the industry, just want to help improve the process with technologies and their systems. So I want to thank everybody for joining, and go out there and build that big, beautiful infrastructure world, and we'll stay in touch. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.